There's nothing more useless than automating a task that shouldn't have been automated in the first place because it shouldn't exist, right? And if a task shouldn't exist, you shouldn't automate it. And the same can be said for processes that aren't fully articulated or thought out to understand what the purpose of that process is. You can now give data science capabilities to the average marketer. The media practitioner who executes campaigns now can have a tool belt that they didn't have available unless they had a data science team internally. That is a superpower. Automation is change management. And there's this push and this pull. In the automation journey, as you continue to scale out automation in your practice, you have to really identify what works and what doesn't work for your business. But if you don't have other folks around you supporting that and also beating the same drum, it makes it very difficult to kind of adopt that sort of mentality, that mindset, that culture.
Welcome to the new automation mindset, where AI, automation, and integration come together. I'm your host, Markus Zirn, and as Chief Strategy Officer and part of the founding executive team at Workato, it is my mission to find these top innovators in AI, automation, and integration and share their journeys with all of you. This podcast is inspired by the Wall Street Journal best-selling book with the same title, written by Workato CEO Vijay Tella. If you would like a free copy of the book, be sure to listen for a special offer at the end of today's episode. So today we will do a special episode. We'll focus on the scale mindset. So, if you read the new automation mindset book, you will know that there was one very particular chapter which really talked about, that automation will just never live up to the full potential if only a few people in the company do it, right? I mean, what scale mindset is all about is that we have to have a systematic approach. We have to make automation part of the culture, the operating fabric of how a company works. And so we want to focus on that today. We want to discuss and talk with my guest, how to make that happen. So it's a really important topic. So welcome, Michael Balarezo. He's the VP of Enterprise Automation and AI at Media.Monks. If you don't know Media.Monks, it's a premier digital agency and actually was just named by AdTech as the first ever AI agency of the year. So we're talking about the pioneers of the pioneers, right? Advertising, digital advertising, AI, digital advertising. So this is really cool. And then Michael himself, he actually was our Workato Groundbreaker Impact Award winner last year. And he really got that because he very successfully ran hackathons at Media.Monks. So we'll talk about that in just a second. And I also want to make sure if you get excited about what Michael has to share with you, he's actually written some really good blog posts also. You can look at it on the Media.Monks website and also at a SODA report. That's the Society of Digital Agencies. All right, with that long intro, apologies for that, but
amazing.
Really excited to have you on here today and have you share, your automation journey and maybe to start off, I said automation and AI. You guys were named the first ever AI agency. How do you think of automation and AI together? You treat these separately? Is this like something that goes together? What's your strategy? Maybe you have some examples of that. Really curious.
Yeah. First, thanks, Markus, for having me on the podcast. Really excited to do this and hope we do more of this sort of thing in the future and share kind of insights and learnings along the way. I've said this once, I'll say it again, that automation is a journey. Right. It starts with taking that first step into understanding like what human potential is and then bringing technology to help realize that. So I believe your question is around automation and AI. Are they the same? Are they separate?
How does it relate? How do you think about automation and AI?
Right. So I believe they're corollary for sure. Right. where AI is more of an extension of automation, right? It certainly is, let's say, the latest innovation in the automation space. We're bringing data science, machine learning, statistics, and I consider that to be like a form of automated decisioning, right? And so it brings a tremendous amount of power to, let's say, people and their workflows if you can embed AI. And so the idea is that they complement each other really well, right? And they are here to serve the same goal, at least from my perspective, right? We're trying to simplify like the human experience, right? But then also enhance the human experience. And so automation, I think, historically has always been pegged as a technology that can kind of help solve like redundant tasks. And AI is the huge leap from that in helping, let's say, not only resolve some redundant tasks, but also take some of the decisioning power, right? And really, I think if the goal is to enhance the human experience, you really want to embed AI into an automated workflow. That's kind of like the holy grail, right? Let's just continuing to be developing more efficient solutions, and AI is here to basically help us do that. So let's review automation in a process. Let's review the process with AI as a part of it, and then let's automate that, right? And then we have like the newest version of the most efficient process possible.
Yeah, really, really like that. So some people think, all right, because in 2023 AI or Gen AI came, that maybe now automation is superseded. I don't think. I mean, at least we at Work Harder, we don't believe that's the case. It almost feels to me, and I think you highlighted that Gen AI is taking automation to another level. It's like, as you said, if you take these AI services and you think of them as a new form of smart decisioning, if you infuse it into an automated process, you can get to like more intelligent automations that you couldn't get to before. You can maybe, you can understand things, you can automate things based on text or conversations or whatever that before you couldn't automate because you were, it was more on basic tasks. So I think it's actually really exciting for someone who is excited about automation. I think AI it takes it to another level. So I happen to know there's this thing called Monks.Flow, right? Monks.Flow
right.
that you guys have. Right. It seems to me like it's an expression of that, isn't it? I mean, it kind of brings automation and AI together. Tell us about what this is and what this means to you guys at Media.Monks.
Sure. And so just to kind of comment on your last bit there about automation and AI, it's interesting to hear stakeholders ask for an AI solution because they are basically awestruck by the possibilities of AI, only to find out that really what they really need is actually a simple automation to handle some of that process, right? And so again, it kind of ties this back to like, let's get the standard process into place. You cannot automate something that isn't standardized, right? And so if you can standardize first, you only serve to basically enable the AI to be automated later in a more succinct fashion. And that's kind of what we're doing now, bridging back to Monks.Flow, right? Monks.Flow is a proprietary piece of software that we're building internally that is trying to solve the problem of bringing AI into embedded workflows at our agency, right? And so we have a tremendous number of teams who pump out some amazing work at our company. You can imagine that a lot of this, let's say, content production is extremely laborious, and it's also very time consuming. Generative AI today has the ability to create assets, hyper realistic assets, but how do you enable that at scale? So what we're doing is we're actually building a proprietary piece of tech that allows us to effectively stitch together modules. Part of these will be Workato recipes. Part of these will be custom services that we've built, and also create a workflow that has AI services embedded into it. So really supercharging our own output, right, through technology.
Mm-hmm. That's fascinating. There's a Harvard Business Review article from Tom Davenport. He was one of the early guys in that business process reengineering movement, who's basically saying exactly that. He's saying, like, look, people since the 90s, people have been practicing to improve business processes and automate business processes and so on. He is so excited about the possible impact of generative AI, how it can actually kind of reach another level of what's possible. Because if you think about the business impact or the ROI or the business value of the automation, I mean, think about adding this digital decisioning engine, this kind of almost digital brain, if you want, inside the processes. I mean, it's really incredible what you can achieve. So really excited about Monks.Flow. I think that sounds like a great direction to go in. Look, I want to go to the heart of this episode, really, and this was about scale mindset. I think sure. Monks.Flow seems like a good construct of how you want to drive that scale. Tell us a little bit about your journey at Media.Monks. So you're responsible for driving automation there. Maybe you can set the stage a little bit. What does your team look like? Who do you report up to? And then how do you try to empower other people in the entire company? I think Media.Monks is a fairly large organization. We're talking, what, 9,000-ish?
Yeah, about 8,000 folks. Right? Yeah, about
8,000 folks. How do you try to take automation to scale at Media.Monks?
Yeah, so that's a big question, right? One of the things that we benefited from early on was this concept of like our entire go-to-market strategy from one of our pillars at Media.Monks, which is land grab, innovate, automate, right? Automation was always a core pillar, if you will, to our growth strategy. And so we understood that in order for us to actually automate, you have to have people who understand how to automate. And at the time, this was about 7 years ago or so, software engineers were the proper, let's say, resource to help us get there. So I was tasked with building out what is now known today as a technical solutions engineering team. And that team enables every single business unit across Media.Monks to continue to push the envelope and find efficiencies and automate, right? So one of the things that became apparent to me through this journey in building out this team was that you can't just hire, let's say, any software engineer. You have to look for engineers that also have soft skills, and that is very difficult to find, right? And so we set on this journey to on this long application process and also hiring process to find these people. And when you find the good ones, they're exceptionally great at their job. They're the unicorns. And then they can effectively be the folks who understand problems and get curious about solving them, not necessarily only from a technical perspective, but then also from like a people perspective. And I think that is the major unlock that we had, right? Too often engineers want to just solve the thing, right? But we need to take a step back and practice empathy and understand the other position, right? And so we benefited from having that automation mindset actually from the very beginning. And so today, that team has grown globally, and it's just one of our teams now that actually supports our automation initiative. Another thing that I think is important is basically our structure, right? We don't report under the IT arm of the business. We actually report directly to the COO, and that's by design, because the operations of the business, they hear day in and day out where all the pain points are, right? And as an operator and someone as a part of the COO staff, your job is to help provide the most efficient processes possible, right? So we have that reporting line, and people know exactly who to go to report scale issues, process issues, software issues. I think traditionally automation kind of fell into the IT bucket because from a procurement perspective, like these automation tools are a tool that is used by, let's say, the IT team or technical people to field tickets. And sure, we have a ticketing system that we use to kind of track some of our effort. But I think fundamentally, the decision to put us under the COO was actually the second unlock for us, because then we had direct access to a lot of the pain points, right? We knew where all the dead bodies were buried, right? Inside of the business, in other words, right? And we had a straight line communication channel to those people, right? And so if you want to have maximum impact to the company, you need to have both a responsive unit, so the ticketing unit, and then you have to have a proactive unit. And oftentimes we find that IT teams are usually reactive, right? So this takes me to my next point, which is structuring the team and how we scaled out automation and this mindset to the company. So we have both a bottoms up, bottoms down, and or top down, bottom up approach to scaling out this service. And so top down, as a part of our team, we have an automation director, someone who is in charge of automation enablement, right? And so this person's main job their function is to interview the executive stakeholders at the company to understand what pains them in their day-to-day, what they feel they should be, let's say, achieving from an operational perspective, and highlighting those pain points and problems, and then prioritizing that in a matrix, right? To see which problems are being surfaced at the executive level that will actually drive the most value if we were to solve them. So that is key to actually setting our automation strategy for the year. These are long-term engagements that last somewhere between 3 to 6 months, if not longer, that will have significant ROI. And then we also have the bottoms-up approach, which is to basically enable the rest of the organization to submit their tickets, their pain points, their automation opportunities, right? The citizen-led the model here, right? And we have a dedicated team of individuals in our automation team that then fields a lot of those requests. Some of these are smaller automations that we can build. Sometimes they're custom tools. Other times they're Workado recipes. But for the most part, the one thing that I still maintain to this day is that we practice empathy when we evaluate every single request, right? We look at a request and we say, great, this is what the sender of this request assumes their problem is. It actually takes a lot of work to really understand what the purpose of that problem stemmed from, and then what actual automation we need to build to solve that problem, right? I think this was a quote I actually got from the Automation Mindset book also, which I say and I repeat all the time, that there's nothing more useless than automating a task that shouldn't have been automated in the first place, because it shouldn't exist, right? And if a task shouldn't exist, you shouldn't automate it. And the same can be said for processes that aren't fully articulated or thought out to understand what the purpose of that process is, right? So yeah, we've basically built leadership inside of the team to have the top-down and bottom-up approach. And so we're approaching automation from two different angles to be as productive and as effective as possible. Does that answer your question?
No, it's fascinating. Look, I have lots of follow-up questions, but it triggers my brain, and it brings me back to my first job. So my first job right out of college, I worked with a company called Booz Allen and Hamilton, a strategy consulting company, and this was the mid-90s, and one of the things that top down, the company had decided was that knowledge management was supposed to be like a real big thing. So think about draw the analogy between automation here, what you're doing, and then at Booz Allen, it was really knowledge management. And I saw the benefits being a consultant there, like what knowledge management could do for the company. Like, you landed on a project and you had like a whole inventory of all the past projects ready at your fingertips. And now the question was like, how do you operationalize this concept of knowledge management? And it was done with push and pull. And so, like, I'll give you an example. Like, for example, you would not get promoted if you didn't basically anonymize your project and create a knowledge piece on it after the project. You would simply, if you did not do that, you would simply not get promoted. Now that was kind of like the push in a way.
Right,
the other thing, there was a pull where actually every year there was almost like a little internal Booz Allen conference, and there were winners awarded, the winner of the knowledge award based on the best knowledge piece, and these people would get 6 months of a course at Harvard University. These kind of things that really meant a lot for a Booz Allen consultant. Do you guys have something culturally? I mean, you mentioned that it's in the Media.Monk kind of mission statement, almost a little bit in there, that you do want to automate these kind of things. Like, culturally, what do you guys do? I mean, is that you report to the COO? I think that is a big deal. How do people feel? Do they want to be part of that automation endeavor? How does that work?
Right. That's an interesting question, because I've always said this, and I've basically consolidated this to just a few words, which is automation is change management, right? And going back to your earlier statement, there's this push and this pull, right? Like, you're going to force everyone to hit some KPIs, anonymize all of your knowledge articles, and make sure that it's available to the entire organization so people can actually benefit from them. And then you celebrate with awards. I think in the automation journey, as you continue to scale out automation in your practice, you have to really identify what works and what doesn't work, right, for your business, right? And there will be different deployments of this system, right? I think initially for us, it's certainly around getting excitement around automation and building the culture, which requires that we make it fun, right? Because people are more receptive to change if it's something that everyone's enjoying and can benefit from. You have to show that also, right? So you have to celebrate the wins across the organization, and you have to have a really good comms plan. So making it fun, like hackathons, that's one of the you alluded to that earlier regarding the Groundbreaker Award, but the hackathons is actually super key to making things fun. Who doesn't love a great hackathon, right? You get to spend half of your day brainstorming an idea, working with other colleagues, maybe some of whom you've never met before across the business. You get to understand other departments and other pain points, and you get to solve problems. And at the end of the day, you get to celebrate in the fact that you built something. Maybe it's not glorious and maybe it's not fully functioning, but hey, it was a team effort and we all learned something together. So I double down on hackathons all the time, provided that you have budget and you have approval to basically launch them, because they're very time consuming to plan, right? And especially to get one across the line at a global level. But celebrate the wins, constant comms. I think the other thing is make sure that the culture continues to grow, is to make the comms and the resources easy to find, right? So whether that's your wiki, your knowledge base, so you actually alluded to a few of these things. And then building and shipping fast is very important. Momentum. You need to drum up the excitement, and then you kind of go back into this feedback loop of making it fun, celebrating the wins. The more tools you can build in a quickly, in a shorter amount of time, actually helps improve the adoption, right? And then I think another thing is it's super important is to practice what you preach, right? And I say this to all of my team members, my leadership team. If we're asking everyone to automate across the business, like, we should be the prime example of teams that should be as automated as possible, right? And so I encourage our teams in our stand-ups and in our weekly meetings to talk about, like, what other process have we evaluated for automation to make ourselves more effective and efficient? What can we cut? What meeting do we not have to have anymore? And it's funny, some of these solutions or suggestions that come up in our calls aren't even automation. It's just like getting into the practice of being more efficient, right? Let's just cut a meeting altogether. We don't need it. We could actually just send an email once a week with the summarized notes from everyone else's actions. That can be automated, and then you send out that newsletter. So one of the examples is every Monday, I actually have a dashboard that gets emailed to me of all of our priority projects, statuses on every single one of the projects, things that I need to focus on for the week. And it's all broken down because the whole team is trained to break down their specific priorities, their blockers, their wins, things they need from me. And then it all gets consolidated. So I can track revenue and I could track priority projects. And I know exactly what I need to do at the very beginning of the week to be super effective. And so I'm using automation as like a superpower. So I could monitor, instead of just the 3 or 4 projects, 30 projects, right? Across the organization, and set up meetings that are purposeful and impactful. So yeah. Setting up also, I'd say leadership, you need leadership buy-in, right? To basically help influence the culture. Yeah, that's basically our approach in a nutshell. But again, it's a team effort, right? I can stand on my soapbox all day in front of the company and say, let's automate, right? But if you don't have other folks around you supporting that and also beating the same drum, it makes it very difficult to kind of adopt that sort of mentality, that mindset, that culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you talked about your team. I guess you're the enablement team for automation,
Sure.
right?
Right.
And you mentioned how that trait that the people who work for you, that they really have to have empathy and curiosity also for the business and how the business operates and so on. It makes sense to me. I'm curious about the other side. Now, the people that you empower now, the people that you enable, that you want to make part of that scaled organization. How do you look at that? So one of my experiences, and I was a little surprised, to be very honest. Maybe, I studied electrical engineering. System thinking was one of the things that maybe came natural to me. But then I learned that actually not that many people were like me. Like, I think thinking in terms of business processes,
Sure.
the more and more I learned, like, how difficult it was for some people to really, think in terms of these flows of tasks and visualize it. They couldn't express it. If you asked them to draw a flow, they almost had a blockage in their brain. They could look at a flow and then validate it, but they just couldn't come up with it. Did you run into some of this? I'm just curious.
Yeah, actually, I think every like automation project starts this way, right? Which is, as an engineer, you come to a conclusion that you think is so obvious that we should automate, but then we then have to go through the process of figuring out what that actually means with the stakeholder, and the stakeholder is really struggling to kind of like land on the same page, right? This is why curiosity is so important for these engineers as well, is because the curiosity element actually helps pull out and draw out the elements needed for the stakeholder to articulate what the real problem is. And in that process, they also learn, oh, this is what it's like to think in terms of automation, right? Automating a task and building an automation system, or even a single automation, is not intuitive, right, to people who are not systems thinkers or engineers. And that was actually a really big learning early on for us, which I think many people who automate also like have gone through. Right. I also find that there's a lot of it's like blank canvas syndrome. Right. Well, if you could automate anything, what would you automate? And then everyone just, it's like crickets, right? Like, well, I don't know what I would automate. Like, it would be great if you could automate X. Well, then you go back to we have a framework that we use to kind of really help identify the value. Well, is that like worth automating? Well, maybe not. Okay, well, then like, let's get to the root of this. And so, yeah, systems thinking is foreign to most people. So automation is not intuitive. I find, to your point, visualizing a process is like the crystallizing moment, right? I say this a lot to our clients that hire us for automating their media practices, is like, have you diagrammed this yet? Do you even know what the number of steps are? And they're like, no, we don't. Great, let's help you, and we'll put this all together on a deck and show them this massive process map. And then I say, great, excellent. This is what your process looks like. Now let's play Fruit Ninja, right? Let's go ahead and take out the game and just start slicing out pieces of this process that no longer have to be here, because guess what? Technology can actually solve a lot of this. And so as one of the efforts this year that we have for our automation enablement is actually to put together a visualization and diagramming course for our stakeholders and for our employees at the company. And as a part of that, we're actually going to be announcing some goals and KPIs around business units just documenting their own process. Like, by the end of the year, we need X percentage of the company to have their processes documented. Pick one end-to-end process. Like, if you need to understand how your own business operates, so that way you can sit down and evaluate where the efficiencies are. And by the way, it would be great if before you submitted an automation request that you supplied your process diagram, right? That alone would be super effective, super efficient, right? And it gets them going through that exercise. They have to actively think through it. They then come to the meeting when we have our discovery session with suggestions, because now they can see it. And so we're just kind of rethinking the process. And some of these things, like I said, aren't even automation. It's just like process redesign, right? Let's just like ask ourselves, why are we doing things the way that we've always done it? Is it just because that's the way we were taught, or is it because this is the most efficient way? And bring that sort of thinking into the conversation, and that tends to open up doors for us. And so, yeah, I agree with you wholeheartedly that it's not intuitive. It's hard. I think if we can show by example, that also tends to inspire people as to like how they can start to think about automating their own day to day.
No, makes total sense. I'm thinking what goes through my mind is AI in this context. So we talked about processes, business processes, and finding inefficiencies, but first really documenting them. What's your experience on your own team as well as in the larger team that, you know, your internal customers, if you want to get a grasp on what AI can do? So here's my personal opinion. You know, when you look out, you know, be it conversations or articles and so on, a lot of people talk about this LLM here, you know, this is what Google does, this is what OpenAI does. It's a lot about technology. There is much less on use cases of AI and how to think about where to use AI and how to apply AI. I somehow have a feeling we're running into the same bottleneck of people not knowing exactly what to do yet again. Not just with the more low complexity manual step automation, but now also with like, okay, well, how do I place these digital brains in my process? How do I make AI part of an automation? I don't know, any war stories, any experiences there?
I can say that we made the decision as a company early on to be fast and first with AI, right? So this was kind of like a relatively large shift in a short amount of time. And we wanted to adopt AI into as many parts of the business as possible. My general sentiment here is the more exposure people get to artificial intelligence, the more welcomed AI and automating AI will be to that company, right? And to individuals. So for us, one of the things that we did was we actually released an LLM for internal use cases only globally across our entire organization relatively quickly. I do think that LLMs have a significant part to play in enhancing the work experience for people. In some cases, they might not be able to completely automate a task, right? But they're kind of better used. Let's say an LLM is as kind of like a companion, right? The word copilot has come around, let's say, and there's some tools like for developers too, but like a sparring partner, right? A good sparring partner helps you understand where your weaknesses are, right? And then you can work on that. So for example, we deployed an LLM across our company, and we've seen use cases from people using the LLM to actually help structure and conduct a workshop, right? Someone is tasked with conducting a workshop with the client, and ideas get generated, agendas get created. An LLM was actually used mid-workshop in the workshop to help pivot the workshop, right? It's fantastic to come up with other ideas to see, well, given certain inputs, what else should we be doing? It's okay to admit that we're not experts at everything, right? And I always say, if you are able to be humble enough to understand that we're always learning, you learn faster from your mistakes, and LLM can actually help you in some of those regards and also inspire you, right? We also have generative AI tools at the company that generate assets for creative inspiration, right? And I think that's a pretty common use case. Also for the engineering concept, where we have LLMs that can help, let's say, intuit what type of function you need, and it basically generates part of that code for you, right? After you name a function, it says, okay, here's your next like 12 blocks or lines of code, and see if this is useful for you, right? In some cases, you might have to throw it all away. In some cases, you could actually reuse a lot of it. We actually see about a 30% increase in our engineering velocity just using copilots. And we track a lot of that. And so I think getting exposure early on is super important, and just consistently giving examples of how other people are using it. Going back to the whole comm structure, right? I think LLMs are also a really good place to start, right? Especially if you secure an LLM that you can deploy across your business, and you train your employees on how to use them safely and effectively while protecting intellectual property and sensitive data.
It's fascinating. So one of the things that kind of caught my eye was that we made some experiments with basically having an LLM almost help you with the design of the process. So if you think about, let's say you tell an LLM, here are the tasks that are typically done without actually giving a process definition, but you say like, okay, well, given these tasks and given kind of this description of what needs to get done, how would you structure the process? And it was actually fascinating to see, like, the LLM would, you basically, you don't have it draw the flow diagram. Maybe you could actually, but what we tried to do was almost like, hey, so which task would you do first? And once that's completed, what would you do next? And you're actually almost like dynamically creating that automation, which is really fascinating. So do you see that the AI is kind of almost inspiring some more basic automations? I think you alluded to that in the very beginning. It seems like maybe AI is that thing that opens people's minds to maybe simpler things that could be done for efficiency purposes, right?
Right. And even unlocking the potential to do more complex things that you couldn't do before, right? Enhancing the experience. Like, for example, you can now give data science capabilities to the average marketer, right? The let's say the media practitioner who executes campaigns now can have a tool belt that they didn't have available unless they had a data science team internally. That is a superpower, right? And if you can train an organization to harness that and use it correctly, and then you can scale that out, you now have like doubled or tripled the value of not only that employee, but then their potential output, right? And so, and that can also be inspiring to an individual. Maybe they end up learning that that they get inspired to, let's say, actually learn a little bit of Python, right? And it's not that hard because now they have a co-pilot that can help them with that, and they don't have to do it alone. I think the barrier to becoming more technical has been significantly reduced because of, let's say, or let me say this, the barrier for deploying technical solutions has been reduced because of artificial intelligence, right? You now have the opportunity to code up something that you might not have been able to a week ago because that technology is available today.
No, this is, I mean, totally agree. I mean, look, you know Workato, and our mission was really to get more people's hands on like automation technology. Instead of someone having to write code or using a much more difficult kind of product where it's very limited in the number of people who could possibly ever understand and use it in a company, we wanted to go broader and have a platform where more people at least can be engaged and collaborate. Now, if you see Gen AI, it's almost like on that same trajectory for artificial intelligence. If you made that point earlier, right? I mean, 5 years back, just 5 years back, you needed a data science team with people like statisticians that know machine learning and so on. And so it was very marginalized to a very small team, and the regular employee just couldn't even think about what this would do for their job. And now, you got the automation being democratized, you're getting the AI being democratized. It's really fascinating what's possible we think 5 years out.
Yeah, I'd say, data scientists and machine learning experts and AI engineers they continue to be super important even today, even with AI, right? Because again, like, these are tools, right? And if you have the specific skill set into applying or modifying these tools, you can apply certain, you can custom train models, right? You can fine tune models to meet very specific use cases. And that does require some technical skill, right? But yeah, for non-technical people, it is a game changer to have a technical companion, right? That has the time and the capacity to actually work with them, right? And I think that is one of the things that has always been something that has been challenging, I think, for businesses as well, is the time component to automation, right? Making sure that everyone has enough time to actually automate, right?
Fair enough. Listen, Michael, I'm looking at the clock here, and while I think I could go for another hour talking to you here about this thing easily, I do think we're unfortunately running out of time. Maybe you have to do a follow-up conversation. But I wanted to, first of all, this was fascinating. I really hope this helped people understand. We got into the mechanics of, how do you scale that? We talked about the potential that AI and automation have together. I don't know if you have any, for the audience to get started, any last words of wisdom, any advice? If they want to set up something like what you have set up at Media.Monks, where would you start?
I'd start with the people who are most passionate and curious about AI and automation. They exist within your organization. They've probably raised a hand or have built something on their spare time. I would grab a hold of those resources and hold them very tightly and continue to inspire them, right? I'd also urge, like talking about some of the challenges that we face and some of the learnings that I've had, to make sure that there is room for automation budget, right? Budget becomes a big blocker, right, for businesses being able to move fast and deploy automation at scale. Some of these services, they just cost money. And if you can have a conversation with the CFO of your business unit or your company and put together the business case, unblocking that is a huge game changer, right? Because then you're not constrained by the financial aspect of deploying automated solutions. You get that out of the way, and then you can start to tinker with some tech, right? And I would also say track it. It is very important to have a measurement strategy for the automation, so that way you can continue to prove return on investment. And there's a difference between soft costs and hard costs, right? Reporting on time saved, I think, is a very common metric that is often used as a proxy for success of automation. But at the end of the day, if you're saving the company 300 hours, let's just say, in working time, the company still has to pay for the people for 300, like for all of the time, right? So you also have to measure what people are doing with the excess time. And if there's any way that you can also measure the hard costs the company no longer has to spend because we deployed automation, that also helps with a lot of the budget and the business case. And so for teams that don't have that issue, go wild, deploy an automation strategy. But if you can solve the budgeting problem early, you'll be very far ahead, at least in removing one of the larger blockers that we typically find.
Awesome. Hey, Michael, thank you so much for your time today. I think this was
absolutely
super insightful. I really hope this inspired some people to join you on that journey of scaling automation and AI in their companies. And thank you so much.
Sure, awesome. Thank you so much for having me, and looking forward to the next one.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode. If you like what you heard, we do have a special offer for you. If you share this or any other episode of the podcast on LinkedIn with the hashtag TNAM for the new automation mindset, that's TNAM, our team will reach out to you and make sure you get a free hardcover copy of the book by our Workato CEO, Vijay Tella. Please make sure to rate today's episode, leave us a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to the show so you will never miss an episode. I'll see you next time.